Alien nobles laughed as she was dragged away, until a human helped her stand again. Alari cities rose beneath domes of glass and gold. Light was synthetic, morality conditional. And some days, the mud was the only honest thing left. 3 days ago, Veltari Arel presided over the Alari Council in the Ivory Spire. Her voice could silence ministers, her signature seal trade routes. She dined above the clouds and never once touched soil. Now she was crawling through it. The path of mud ran in perfect spirals around the Dome Plaza, a ceremonial disgrace reserved for traitors, oath-breakers, and worst of all, those who crossed caste lines. Her shackled wrists bled freely as she dragged herself forward, naked but for a torn ceremonial shroud barely clinging to her shoulders. Her once immaculate green skin was smeared in brown and black, and her long black hair dragged behind her like a shadow that wouldn't die. She couldn't feel her knees anymore, only the hot sting of gravel hidden beneath the filth. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and every movement sent fire through her spine. But worse than the pain were the voices above. Look at her, the mudblood heiress. Touching a human? Protecting one? They should have planted her like compost, then at least she'd serve a purpose. The nobles floated above in hover balconies, their robes drifting like petals in the windless air. There was no anger in their voices, just delight, cold, elegant amusement. She tried not to hear them, but Alari ears were sensitive. Every clipped laugh echoed, every word embedded like a thorn. Veltari kept her eyes down, but in her mind, a single moment repeated like a song with no end. A flash of brown eyes, wide, young, terrified. A human boy no older than 15, trembling as guards raised their rods. His only crime, bowing too slowly during a delegation. And her voice, firm, foolish, stop. He is not a beast. That was all it had taken. A noble lady speaking on behalf of a human. The rumors spread faster than pollen. That she loved him. That she carried his child. That her blood was already tainted. The boy had been executed within the hour. She had been dragged from her spire the next morning. Mud squelched beneath her as her elbows gave out. Her body collapsed into the wet earth with a slap. Laughter rippled through the air. Above, a cluster of Alari youths hovered in pearl-lined chairs, sipping from translucent fruit shells. One leaned closer to the glass of the biodome's upper tier, grinning. She looks better down there, he said. Don't you think? I say we water her, another snorted. Maybe she'll bloom or rot. They laughed like their mouths had never touched bitterness. Veltari closed her eyes, not to block them out, but because she could feel the sob rising in her throat, and she would not give them that. The ceremonial guards turned and left. Her punishment was complete. She was no longer noble, no longer anything, just mud. Luthen Revo had no intention of seeing it. He rarely looked up from his work, let alone toward the glass ceilings where Alari rituals played out like theater. The gardens needed too much of him. Soil balances, nutrient readings, humidity thresholds. He spent his days in a constant rhythm of tending, pruning, listening. Plants responded to patience. People, in his experience, did not. But the Orchid Vault's frost sensor had triggered unexpectedly. And so, with scanner in hand and sleeves still rolled past his elbows, he'd emerged into the mid-tier corridor just in time to hear the laughter. At first, he ignored it. Then he caught the word, mudblood. And for some reason his gaze lifted. He saw her lying near the nutrient basin, covered in filth, breathing barely. Her arms were still shackled, though no one remained to enforce the sentence. The ceremonial chains gleamed against her green skin like cruel jewelry. The Alari above giggled and drifted on. The scene was already stale to them, but not to him. He knew who she was. Everyone did. Veltari Arel. He'd passed her once years ago in the Skybridge garden. She hadn't spoken, but she'd looked directly at him. Looked, not glanced. Her eyes hadn't held pity or contempt, just a question. Maybe it was nothing, but maybe not. Now she was here, and no one was coming for her. Luthen stepped beyond the threshold of the worker corridor. The climate shield prickled as he passed through. Human technicians were not allowed in ceremonial spaces without summons. No one stopped him. She didn't see him at first. Her hair obscured her face, slick and tangled. But as his boots squelched in the mud beside her, she flinched and turned her head. Their eyes met. There was no recognition in her gaze, just confusion, pain, suspicion. He didn't speak. He knew better than to use words here. Instead, he knelt slowly and unfastened his work cloak. It was thick, layered canvas, stained with dirt and fertilizer and sun. A poor replacement for dignity, but it was warm. She tensed as he brought it forward. Her fingers curled reflexively, like claws. Then, as he draped it over her shoulders, something in her exhaled, just once. Not a sigh, a release. Her skin was cold. He extended his hand. She stared at it. "Why?" she rasped, voice brittle as dry bark. "Why would you—" He shook his head, not in dismissal, just gently. Not now. When she made no move to take his hand, he stepped closer and crouched beside her, looping his arm under hers with quiet, practiced ease. She let him. Slowly he helped her rise. Her legs trembled. The chains clinked faintly. Mud dripped from her fingers. He didn't look at the mess, just at her. At her face, her eyes, the fading fire behind them. She met his gaze just for a moment. There was no gratitude in it, but there was awareness, a flicker of something neither of them could name yet. Luthen adjusted the cloak around her shoulders. She leaned slightly into his side. It was less a choice than a necessity. Together, they turned away from the plaza. No fanfare, no protest. Just the soft suction of steps in damp earth and the quiet hiss of greenhouse air filters above them. Behind them, in the silence, the orchids bloomed, but no one stayed to see it. The fungal greenhouse had long been abandoned, too humid for ornamental flora, too dim for noble tours, but it still breathed. The air inside was damp and thick with the scent of decay and quiet growth. Mycelial shelves climbed the walls like pale spirals. Bioluminescent caps glowed faintly in patches across the soil, casting soft greens and blues that made the shadows feel alive. This was where Luthen brought her. He didn't carry her the whole way. She insisted on walking when she could, teeth clenched, breath shallow, and head bowed beneath the hood of his work cloak. The chains around her wrists clinked softly with every step. He didn't ask questions, just adjusted his pace to match hers. Now she lay on a reclaimed cot at the back of the dome, near a rusted utility wall where heat still pulsed in faint intervals through the old pipes. The air was warmer here, but not by design, just leftover breath from systems forgotten by Alari engineers. Her skin, once the soft green of desert aloe, was now bruised, dirt-smudged, and streaked with raw patches where the restraints had bitten too deep. She hadn't spoken since asking him why in the plaza. He hadn't answered then, he still hadn't. Now, as she lay silent beneath his cloak, Luthen worked a few feet away with practiced economy. He crushed dried crimson leaf into a shallow dish and poured warm water from his flask over it. The mixture turned golden, bitter-smelling. He set it aside to steep. Then he crouched and opened the kit slung at his side. Old, patched canvas. Inside, fiber-wrapped nutrient bars, a folding med knife, antiseptic powder, plant salve, a soil probe, 3 seed tubes, and a ceramic flask sealed with green wax. He paused, then reached for the bar and flask. When he returned to her side, she didn't move. "You need to eat," he said, his voice quiet but firm, not commanding, just certain. "Small bites." She didn't open her eyes. "I'm not poisoning you," he added, a touch of dryness in his tone. Then he unwrapped the bar and broke it into quarters. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at the food. "What is it?" Her voice rasped like paper dragged over stone. "Grain stem, compressed with root sugars. It'll hold until your system stabilizes." He held out a piece. Veltari stared at it. Then after a pause, reached for it with a hand that trembled uncontrollably. The bar crumbled slightly between her fingers. She brought it to her lips and bit down too fast. Reflex from starvation, not choice. She gagged. "Slow," Luthen murmured. She nodded once. Her pride was cracked, but not gone. The second bite went down easier. So did the third. By the fourth, she was chewing more than swallowing. Her eyes fluttered shut, just for a breath. When she opened them again, he was holding out the flask. "This will burn," he warned. She took it anyway. The liquid was bitter and sharp. It hit the back of her throat and made her cough, then wince. But she didn't stop. It warmed her stomach with a slow heat that spread outward, a gentle flush beneath the chill. Not comfort, but something close enough to remember it. Only when the silence stretched too long did she ask, "Why this place?" He looked around the greenhouse, the fogged walls, the overgrown walkways, the flickering vents. "No one comes here," he said simply. A beat passed. "I was supposed to die in the plaza," she said. "They were supposed to let me rot there." "You didn't," he said. Another silence, then, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes." "And you still help me?" "Yes." Her gaze narrowed slightly, not in anger but in confusion, in disbelief. Why? He didn't look at her right away. He took the dish of crimson leaf infusion and stirred it with a shard of bark, then brought it to her and set it beside her cot. Because things that are thrown away, he said, don't always deserve to be. His voice wasn't sharp, it was tired, lived in. Veltari studied him in the low light. His skin was sun-browned, marked with old calluses and a long-healed burn on the back of his hand. His face bore the patience of someone used to silence. His hair was a shade darker than clay, and his eyes, when he finally looked at her, held no expectation. I was raised, she said slowly, to believe humans were useful, but disposable. Luthen didn't flinch. And now, he asked. I don't know, she whispered, but you don't look at me the way they did, even before I fell. He said nothing. I remember you, she added suddenly, the thought surprising her as it formed. In the Skybridge garden. You were trimming a flowering vine near the boundary wall. He blinked. That was years ago. You looked up at me. You looked back. Something flickered between them. Not warmth. Not yet. But something. He reached for the salve and unsealed it, releasing a scent like crushed bark and clean rain. He glanced at her wrists. You should let me clean those. She didn't answer. I'll ask again later. He rose without pressing further and returned to his satchel, folding things back into place, moving like someone used to being ignored. Veltari shifted beneath the cloak. Her fingers brushed the cot's edge. She felt the ache in her limbs more clearly now. Her body was beginning to thaw, and with it, the weight of memory returned. She had spoken for a human, and her house had erased her name for it. She should have let the boy be beaten. She should have closed her mouth and preserved her rank. But something in his eyes had broken her. A look she'd seen only once before, in a mirror long ago when she had first realized how little her nobility meant in the face of cruelty. The punishment was not for the act. It was for remembering she had a heart. Her stomach clenched. Whether from pain or hunger, she couldn't tell. Luthen, she said, his name strange on her tongue. He looked over, surprised but silent. I don't know what I am anymore. He nodded once, like he understood. Then, after a moment, you're breathing. That's enough for today. She turned her face into the cloak and let the darkness close in, not because she trusted him, but because she had no strength left to doubt. And because for the first time in days, the air didn't reek of judgment, only earth, only life. The dome had its own rhythm now. It wasn't silence, nothing in nature ever truly was, but a living stillness. A deep breath held just beneath the surface. Spores drifted like slow-falling snow. The moss beds whispered underfoot when stepped on gently. And for the first time since her exile, Veltari didn't feel watched. She worked beside Luthen in the lower beds, knees in the compost, sleeves rolled, fingers caked with wet soil. Her movements were clumsy but purposeful. He said nothing, just moved around her with steady ease. No orders, no praise, just presence. That morning, he had handed her a set of worn gloves without a word. They didn't fit perfectly. Her hands were slimmer than his, but they protected her palms from the biting acidity of the fungal fibers. She had accepted them with a nod. That, too, felt like progress. I'm not flattening them, am I? She asked, after placing a seedling into a repurposed nutrient coil. Luthen glanced over, wiped a smear of dirt across his brow. You're pressing too tight. Loosen the base so water can pool beneath. She adjusted it. I didn't think dirt could be so particular, she murmured. It's not dirt, he said. It's a living system. Every grain has memory. She didn't laugh. She wanted to. But the truth in his voice was too steady, too old. They continued in silence. Above them, the overhead light strips dimmed to mimic afternoon. Condensation began collecting on the arching glass ribs. Veltari brushed her hair from her eyes and stood, stretching her sore back. Luthen moved to the far side of the dome, limping slightly from the lingering pain in his leg. He crouched beside an overgrown irrigation outlet and cleared a cluster of dead stalks. She watched him. The way his body moved, not graceful, not strong, but certain, like someone who'd learned every inch of this place not through maps, but through repetition, through failure, through time. I remember you, she said suddenly. He paused but didn't turn. In the Skybridge garden, 3 years ago, maybe more. You were pruning a collapsed vine system. I passed with my tutors. Still nothing. You looked up, you saw me, and then you looked down again, like I wasn't even worth noticing. He stood, wiped his hands on his tunic, and turned. "No," he said. "I looked down because I didn't want them to see me looking." She blinked. "Why?" "Because if I stared at you too long, they'd think I forgot my place." A beat passed between them, not tense, but weighted. "You did look different," he added. "That day. You were the only one not laughing when the boy spilled dye on his robe." Veltari's lips tightened. "He was whipped after we left." "I know." Another silence. He picked up a metal flask, shook it near his ear, then handed it to her. "Hydration?" She took it, drank. The water tasted faintly of minerals and crushed root leaf, cleaner than anything she'd tasted since the day they stripped her of title. She handed it back. "How long have you been here?" 7 years. "You never left?" "Didn't need to." He moved back to the compost wall. Veltari followed. "I used to think gardens were ornamental," she admitted, "that they existed for aesthetic balance." For the eye, he didn't smile, but his voice softened. "Then you didn't know what hunger looked like." "No," she said. "I didn't." She knelt beside him. The smell of wet growth rose around them, sweet, slightly bitter. He passed her a rusted hand rake. "See the white threads along the root mass?" She nodded. "Don't cut them. That's the mycelium." "I remember," she said. "You mentioned that before." She worked slowly. This time he didn't correct her. The dome warmed as they moved in tandem. She peeled back old moss. He loosened soil. She placed saplings. He irrigated. They didn't speak again for a long while. Later, as the simulated daylight dimmed toward evening, they sat near the eastern filter shaft, backs against the wall. Steam hissed from the nearby vents in gentle pulses. Luthen unwrapped 2 bars of preserved stem cake and handed her one. Veltari stared at the bar. "These used to be ration food on my family's exploration fleets. I haven't eaten one in years." "They're still ration food," he said. She took a bite. It was bland, fibrous, slightly sweet. "Still awful," she muttered. "Still enough." They ate in silence. When they finished, Veltari leaned back and exhaled deeply. Her shoulders ached. Her legs tingled. But it wasn't discomfort. It was proof of use. "You don't ask me questions," she said after a while. "Not even the obvious ones. I wait for answers to be offered. And if they're never offered, then I didn't need them." She turned her head, studied his face, lined with fatigue, framed by a week's worth of unshaved growth, yet calm. His eyes were always calm. "You're not like any human I was taught about. You're not like any Alari I was warned about," he replied. That made her smile, only a flicker, but it felt like the first real one in weeks. "What are we doing?" she asked, not with fear, but curiosity. "This, working together, eating together, growing things," he said simply. "I wasn't talking about the plants." He looked at her then. Not away, not down. She didn't break the gaze. For a long moment, nothing moved between them but breath. Then carefully, Luthen reached toward her and gently adjusted the edge of her glove where it had slipped. His fingertips brushed the skin of her wrist. She tensed. He paused, waited, then pulled his hand back, slow, deliberate. But she didn't flinch this time. She just looked down at her hand, at where he'd touched her, not possessively, not hungrily, but as if it were something sacred, as if even that gesture needed consent. "You didn't mean anything by it," she said quietly. "No," he said, "but I meant every part of it." That puzzled her. "You didn't mean anything, but you meant it." He met her eyes. "I don't take from the soil. I ask. Same with people." She turned that over in her mind like a stone in her palm, and then softly she said, "Tomorrow, will you teach me how to splice the bloom lines?" "I already planned to," he said. That night, she didn't return to her cot immediately. She stayed in the dome, watching the slow pulse of bioluminescent caps across the fungal beds. There was no sound but the hush of filtered air and the faint creak of the dome settling overhead. She didn't know what was happening between them. Not yet, but for the first time since the path of mud, she didn't feel broken. She felt planted, and that maybe was something. The following morning came with the scent of rain. Simulated, of course, harvested condensation cycling through the dome's filtration. But the smell was clean, metallic, and brief. It clung to the moss like a memory. Veltari awoke before the lights shifted. Her body no longer screamed in protest, though her ribs still twinged if she twisted too fast. She pulled on the worn gloves Luthen had given her and crossed the dome to the compost beds. He was already there, kneeling beside a cluster of wilted stalk roots. His breath puffed faintly in the cold air, misting as he exhaled. They didn't greet each other. They rarely did. He shifted aside to make room. She knelt beside him without speaking. They worked. It was Veltari who broke the silence, after an hour had passed and her hands were shaking less. "Do you ever forget it?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "Forget what?" "Where you came from?" Now he turned. "No," she nodded, unsurprised. "Neither do I." He didn't push her to explain. She wasn't sure she would have spoken if he had, but after a long minute, the words came anyway. "I was born in a tower called the Ivory Ring. Everything there was polished, crystal glass, polished steel, mirrored thoughts. I was taught history and logic before I could walk, politics by the time I could speak." Luthen waited, quiet but listening. "I rose faster than most. My mind was sharp, or so they said. I spoke in councils by 16. By 20 I was feared for the precision of my words." She dug her hands deeper into the soil, not for work, but to feel something living. "I thought that made me untouchable." Her voice hardened. "And then a boy dropped my seal case during a council procession. He panicked. He knew the punishment. I stepped forward, shielded him. I said it was my fault." She went still. "They didn't believe me. Or maybe they did, and that was the problem." Luthen said nothing. "They thought I had touched him, that I had let him touch me, a noble and a human." Her lip curled. "They didn't ask if it was true. They just sentenced me." She reached into the soil again, fingertips grazing a warm, living root. "He was executed within the day, quietly, off record. I found out when they changed his name on the servant ledger." She blinked once, slow. "That was the first time I realized what I'd spent my life preserving." Luthen's voice came low. "You weren't punished for breaking the law. No, you were punished for remembering he had a name." The breath caught in her throat. She turned her head toward him, searching for sarcasm, but found none. She looked down again. "I don't even know what his name was." "You remember his face?" "Yes." "Then say it." She stopped, swallowed. "I remember the scar above his left brow. His eyes were always wide, like he expected to be struck." She closed her own. "He tried to thank me. I never let him." The silence held for a while. No wind, no voices. Only the slow heartbeat of the dome's systems. Then Luthen spoke. "I was born in the Thales 4 basin. My mother grew algae mats and cracked aquatubes. My father taught me to build root walls out of crushed rock and runoff mesh." He picked up a coil of mycelium and split it carefully between his thumbs. "One night, the containment field failed. Toxins leaked into the groundwater. I was 10. I watched a whole harvest rot black in a single night." He wiped his hands on his trousers, slow and firm. "People died quietly, and no one came. We were moved after the colony was deemed economically defunct. They didn't even shut it down officially, just stopped renewing shipments." He looked up. His eyes weren't angry, just steady. "I was brought here because I knew how to keep things alive in dying places. That's what they wanted. They didn't want my words, just my hands." Veltari met his gaze. It was like staring into dark soil that somehow still held heat. "You're not angry?" "I was. But anger is loud, and loud things die faster." She hesitated. "Why help me? That day?" Luthen looked away, toward the far edge of the dome where the spores pulsed gently against the glass. "I don't know." "That's not true." He considered. "I saw someone who was falling, and I'd fallen before." She didn't reply, just sat there letting the quiet deepen. After a while, she removed her gloves and touched the soil barehanded. "I used to believe I was superior, by birth, by intellect, that I could fix things from above." She pressed her fingers deeper into the soil. "Now I know, nothing grows from above. Everything starts here." Luthen's voice came soft. "Roots don't rise, they reach." She laughed once dryly. "You're a philosopher, and no one told me." "No," he said, "just a man who listens more than he talks." She looked at him again. Really looked. There were lines in his face that hadn't been there weeks ago. Or maybe they'd always been there and she'd never taken the time to see them. He moved like someone used to being ignored. Yet everything he touched lived. That was the difference. She reached out, hesitated, then touched the back of his hand. It was rough, warm. He stilled, but didn't pull away. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered. "Neither do I," he said. "But we're doing it." She nodded. "I want to stay." He turned to her. "You already have." They sat like that as the lights shifted, turning the dome to evening. The temperature dropped, the air thickened with spore breath, and the beds glowed faintly in the dark. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't yet love, but it was enough, and it was real. The first thing Valtari noticed was the shift in the air. She was sorting compost layers in the back quadrant of the dome, half buried in a pile of spongy moss clippings when it changed. At first, she thought it was just a fault in the dome's pressure regulators, a harmless hiccup. But then the humidity began to rise unnaturally fast, and a sharp, acrid scent burned her nose. She stood, heart pounding, and looked toward the corridor that led to the outer biodomes. Smoke. Not steam, not mist. Smoke. Thick, dark, rising. She dropped the rake and ran. The airlock door into Dome 5 hissed open sluggishly, the emergency override lights already flashing. Heat blasted her skin like a slap, and smoke curled around her ankles. A low, distant alarm was muffled by the malfunctioning dampeners. Something had gone terribly wrong. "Luthen!" No answer. She moved inside, shielding her mouth with her sleeve. The fire hadn't spread far yet, but the nutrient tanks had ignited along the eastern wall, and the overhead lighting had gone volatile, sparking and flaring. Fungal walls blackened and popped under the heat, releasing a sharp, bitter stench. Through the smoke, she spotted him, collapsed beside the irrigation manifold, pinned beneath a collapsed section of ductwork. He was conscious, coughing violently, one hand feebly pushing against the metal beam pressing into his leg. "Stay still," she shouted, voice ragged. She crossed the space, heat searing her face and arms, and dropped to her knees beside him. The duct was heavier than it looked, ancient, reinforced alloy, warped from the fire. She scanned the floor quickly and found a cracked pry bar discarded behind a supply crate. Wedging it beneath the beam, she put her weight into it, shoulders straining, muscles screaming. The beam shifted, barely. "Luthen, twist your leg now!" He gritted his teeth and obeyed. With a low groan of metal, he slid free and collapsed into her arms. His skin was hot, damp, and streaked with soot. She could feel the tremor in his limbs. "Can you walk?" "Barely," he rasped. "Then lean." They stumbled out together, her arm under his, breath shallow, eyes burning. The dome hissed closed behind them, and the fire seal activated with a boom that made the glass quake. Inside the fungal greenhouse, the air was cooler but thick with tension. Luthen sagged onto the floor, one leg twisted awkwardly beneath him. Valtari knelt beside him, panting. "I need to check the damage." "No," he muttered. "It's not safe." "I meant your leg." He winced as she inspected it. His boot was scorched, the fabric melted slightly. The swelling was immediate, unnatural. His knee was badly displaced. "It's dislocated. I have to set it." "Do it." She didn't hesitate. Bracing her hands, one on his thigh, the other on his ankle, she locked eyes with him. "On 3, he nodded. 1. She pulled before she said 2. His cry was raw and guttural, but he didn't move, just clenched his fists and breathed hard through his nose. When it was done, she wrapped the joint with stabilizer mesh and applied the cooling gel. The trembling in his hands didn't stop, even after the pain receded. "You saved me," he said hoarsely. "So did you," she said, "every day before this." They sat in silence, both trying to catch their breath. The emergency vent system activated overhead with a low thrum, drawing out the last traces of smoke. The light flickered, then steadied. The dome once again exhaled. Valtari passed him a flask of water. He drank slowly, hands still unsteady. "Why did you go in alone?" she asked. "I thought I could control it. I've stopped worse." "That doesn't make it worth the risk." "I wasn't thinking about worth," he said. "What then?" He looked at her. Not just at her face, but through it, to whatever she still hid. "I thought if I lost this place, I'd lose what we built." She stilled. Her hands dropped into her lap. "I would have come with you." "I know," he said. "That's why I didn't ask." They were quiet again. Then softly she reached out and touched his shoulder, her hand uncertain at first, but steady as he didn't move away. "I was afraid," she said. "Of the fire? Number of watching it take you." He looked at her with something unspoken in his eyes. Not just gratitude, not admiration, recognition. Valtari's throat tightened. She pulled her hand back, but he caught her fingers gently. "I don't know what we are," she said. "Does it matter?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered, "because I'm not running anymore, and I need to know if I'm standing alone." He shifted, despite the pain, and sat upright. His thumb brushed across the back of her hand, just once, but with reverence. You're not. The answer wasn't grand. It wasn't wrapped in poetry or pretense, but it was the most certain thing she'd heard in years. She sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, as they watched the spores return to their gentle pulsing rhythm. Life resettling around them, the dome healing just like they were. And when he leaned his head back and closed his eyes, she stayed there beside him. Not because she was afraid or guilty or needed to be useful, but because something had been forged in the fire, and neither of them would leave it behind. 3 days passed after the fire. Luthen's leg mended slowly, wrapped in stabilizer mesh and rested between short walks. Veltari insisted he stay seated during most tasks, but he was never idle. He repurposed broken crates, recalibrated moisture sensors, rebalanced the dome's thermal output. It wasn't pride that kept him working. It was purpose. Veltari matched his pace. She rose before the light shift, washed in recycled water, and worked until her gloves split at the seams. The calluses on her palms were no longer shameful. They were proof. And each morning when she found a fresh ration pack or a patched tunic folded neatly beside her cot, she knew it was Luthen. He never mentioned it. They never spoke of what passed between them the day of the fire. It wasn't silence out of fear or shame. It was a pause, like water gathering in the roots before it breaks through the surface. Something deeper was forming, and they both knew it. But peace never held long on Virelia. The first warning came subtly. One of the compost sensors, long disconnected, suddenly blinked online. Velthari was the one who noticed. Luthen said nothing at first, but that evening, he disabled every dome access panel and rerouted the filtration alerts to a manual override switch hidden beneath the nutrient basin. The second warning was louder. They returned from the moss beds one morning to find their outer door ajar. No breach alarm had sounded. Nothing appeared stolen. But a section of the greenhouse wall had been disturbed, just enough to say, "We were here. We're watching." Veltari stood at the doorway, breathing shallowly. "They know. They've always known," Luthen replied. She turned to him. "Then why now?" "Because we stopped hiding." That night she couldn't sleep. She stood barefoot in the dome's central walkway, staring at the slow pulse of the fungal lights overhead. Their rhythm soothed her once. Now it felt like a countdown. She found Luthen sitting against the southern wall, datapad in hand, a pile of old-growth logs beside him. He didn't look up as she approached. "You have a plan," she said. "I do." She knelt beside him. He held up the datapad. On the screen, a single symbol pulsed, a sigil etched in ancient Alari script, a tree whose roots coiled beneath its branches. "The Greenkeeper's Code," he said. "Old law, forgotten but not erased." She studied it. "I've seen this before, on temple doors, ancient tribunals. It was once used to grant sanctuary to those who restored corrupted biomes," Luthen said. "Didn't matter if they were noble, bonded, or born in dirt. If you revived the land, you belonged to it. And it protected you? By law, yes. In practice, it hasn't been invoked in generations." Veltari narrowed her eyes. "You think they'll honor it now?" "They won't have a choice," he said. "It's still encoded in the civic databanks. If we can prove what we've done, document the restoration, the fertility indexes, species regrowth, they'll have to acknowledge it, publicly." She leaned back on her heels. "You kept this, all this time." "I found it 4 years ago, buried in a sub-archive. Didn't know when I'd need it, just knew I would." She looked at him. "You were waiting for a moment like this?" I was waiting for someone who'd fight for it." They sat in silence. Then quietly Veltari said, "If we step forward, there's no returning." "I know. They'll drag my name back through the dirt. They already did." "And you?" He met her eyes. "I've been nothing but dirt in their eyes since the day I arrived." Her throat tightened. "Then we go together," she said. The next day, 2 figures approached the dome, Alari in white-trimmed armor, their posture too upright, too casual to be harmless. Veltari spotted them from the observation hatch. She didn't call for Luthen. She didn't need to. He was already at her side. One of the soldiers raised a comm device, activated it without speaking. A moment later, a third figure approached, robed in slate blue, his features severe, mouth drawn like a wound that never healed. They stood before the gates of the arboreal hall as dawn broke. It was not a place meant for laborers or traders. The structure had been grown, not built, its great root pillars twisting into a vaulted canopy of translucent bark, veins of light filtering through like sunlight on water. The scent of old moss and judgment hung thick in the air. Valtari had not stood this straight since her trial on the path of mud, but now her wrists were bare, no chains, only calluses. Beside her, Luthen adjusted the strap of the satchel slung over his shoulder. Inside it, the seed records, the environmental logs, and a single flowering pod he had wrapped in cloth. Neither of them spoke as the doors opened. The council sat in a ring, high-backed and motionless in their pale robes. The platform in the center held no podium, no defense barrier, only a circle of untreated stone, older than the tower that surrounded it. Valtari stepped forward. Her feet made no sound. She stopped in the center, then turned to face them. Luthen joined her without hesitation. A voice echoed across the chamber. Valtari Arel, you are charged with violation of caste protocol, unlawful union, and genetic contamination. How do you plead? I plead growth, she said calmly, and truth. A murmur rippled through the seated nobles. Thorel Arel, her cousin, rose from the northern seat, his voice clipped. You stand accused under blood and binding. You no longer bear a house. You hold no claim here. She met his gaze without flinching. I don't stand as a daughter of Arel, she said. I stand as a keeper of living systems. That title cannot be stripped. Luthen unsealed the satchel. The data strip activated, casting the sigil of the Greenkeeper's code into the center of the chamber, a tree with its roots spiraling into law. Code 17, Section A, he said. Any being who restores a dead biome within noble territory may claim sanctuary, witness, and station as keeper. By act, not blood. More murmurs. One counselor adjusted her translator cuff. Another shifted uncomfortably. Thorel did not sit. This law is ceremonial. It hasn't been invoked in over 600 cycles. It was never repealed, Luthen replied, only buried. He placed the flowering pod gently on the stone. This species, he said, was extinct on Thales 4, its genetic line broken for generations. We found remnants in fungal residue and coaxed it back. It now thrives. You may verify the sequence. Valtari stepped forward. This is not rebellion, it's reclamation. A long silence. Then from a far seat, an elder counselor spoke. And what claim do you make, Valtari, if keeper status is granted? She answered without pause. No claim of caste, no return to privilege, only the right to live without pursuit, to remain in the land I helped restore, with him. The emphasis was deliberate. The council heard it. Therel's voice darkened. And you would place a bonded human, an earthborn, within our horticultural sanctums? Luthen didn't look at him. I never asked for your sanctum, only space to grow. A low hum passed through the chamber. The council recessed. 48 minutes passed. Valtari and Luthen stood in silence the entire time. He didn't reach for her hand, but she felt his presence as something woven into the fabric of her breath. No fear now, just wait, shared. When the council returned, the elder counselor stood. After review of Code 17A, biometric records, and restoration evidence, we acknowledge restoration sufficient for keeper designation. Valtari closed her eyes, just briefly. The elder continued. As of this moment, Valtari of no house is hereby granted the status of keeper. Luthen Revo, bonded laborer, is granted shared sanctuary within restored territory. Therel's face twisted. This is precedent. It is law, the elder said flatly. And that was the end of it. They didn't bow. They didn't thank the council. They simply left. The path back to the biodome was quiet. No guards followed. No drones hovered. For the first time in months, the air felt like it belonged to them. The door to the greenhouse opened with a familiar sigh. Inside, the temperature had stabilized. The beds were thriving. New sprigs curled from old root clusters. The canopy light was soft, warm, breathing with life. Valtari's breath caught. Therel, she muttered. Luthen's brow lifted. Family? My cousin, she said, and a council minister now. Therel raised his voice, smooth and sharp. Valtari Arel, you are hereby summoned to appear before the High Council under charges of genetic dilution, social disruption, and unlawful cohabitation with a bonded class worker. Valtari stepped forward without hesitation. I invoke the Greenkeeper's law. That paused him. Luthen stepped beside her and activated the datapad. The sigil flared into view, projecting statistical data into the air. Soil analysis, growth indexes, fungal species recovered, water balance graphs. genetic markers of restored seed lines. This dome was dead, Luthen said. Now it sustains over 30 species, 10 of them classified extinct in the Varelian registry. Thorell didn't blink. An obsolete law from a pre-ascension era. Still active, Veltari countered. Still binding. Thorell's expression didn't change. You disgrace your line. No, she said. You disgrace it by pretending nothing outside the tower matters. The silence was cold. Then, you'll have your hearing, he said. Under observation, witnessed. Let the public see what filth you've chosen. Veltari's eyes narrowed. Let them. That evening, after the soldiers left, Luthen sat with his legs stretched out across a slab of moss, his hand wrapped around a heat stone. Veltari knelt beside a rack of sprouting vine root, checking moisture levels. She didn't speak for a while. Then, I was afraid they'd come. But not like this. He didn't look at her. You were always going to face them. I know. She rose, crossed to him and sat. I thought I could survive exile, isolation. But this, standing in front of them, not as their puppet or their shame, just as myself, feels harder. He nodded. Because they can't erase what grows back. She turned to him, suddenly serious. You're not doing this for me, are you? He shook his head. I'm doing this with you. Her breath stilled. And then, without ceremony, she leaned her head against his shoulder. They didn't need more words. They'd already planted them. Luthen moved to check the nutrient index. Veltari walked the rows, fingers brushing across the tops of growing stalks, each one a proof of everything they'd fought for. You're limping less, she said without turning. I heal slowly, but you do heal. He looked at her, expression unreadable. Are you staying? She stopped, faced him fully. This place was made for hiding, she said, but we turned it into something else. You made it sacred, he said. So did you. They stood facing each other, hands still apart, but something larger connecting them. I didn't expect to survive this, she admitted. Much less, feel something again. You're not alone in that, she stepped forward. No hesitation. Her fingers slid into his, grounding in the soil-stained warmth of his palm. I don't want to be a symbol, she whispered. Good, he said. Symbols can be burned, but what we've planted, that grows. She leaned into him, forehead against his chest. Not to hide, just to rest. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and together they stood in the silence they'd earned. Outside, a new delivery signal blinked on the dome's outer gate. Recognition of keeper status. Supplies authorized. Protected zone confirmed. Inside, the fungal beds pulsed softly beneath their feet. Later that night, Luthen opened the side panel of the seed archive and took out a wrapped cloth bundle. He placed it gently on the workbench. Veltari approached, curious. What is it? He unfolded it to reveal a single wooden tag, weathered, cracked, but still bearing the etched crest of Thales 4. A dead world. A lost root. I kept this, he said, so I wouldn't forget where I came from. She traced the edge of the tag with one fingertip. And now? Now I plant it here. They dug a hole together, just one near the dome's center. He placed the tag in the soil. She covered it. No words were said. None were needed. What had begun in exile, in ruin, and in silence had grown into something neither of them had dared imagine. Not nobility, not rebellion. Something older, something true. They did not rise to rule. They stayed to grow. And this time, when the roots took hold, no one dared tear them up. The dome had never felt quieter. Not empty, but full of something softer. It was late morning, the artificial sunlight pouring golden through the canopy panels, casting slow-moving shadows that drifted over the mossy ground like clouds over a still sea. The plants were in bloom, mildly, humbly, the kind of blossoming that didn't shout, but unfolded when no one was looking, like healing. Veltari sat on the edge of the old irrigation ledge, her legs stretched out, bare feet brushing the damp earth. Her tunic sleeves were rolled high, arms flecked with specks of pollen and streaks of soil. She hadn't bothered to wash them yet. She liked the feel of it, the life on her skin, the proof of work well done. Luthen was kneeling a few feet away, head bowed over a bed of broadleaf roots. His movements were slow today, careful. Not from pain, but peace. His tools sat forgotten on the bench behind him. He wasn't fixing anything. He was just tending. Veltari watched him for a long time, chin resting in her hand. The silence between them had become something sacred over the past days. Not the cold silence of fear, or the strained silence of doubt, but the silence people shared when they knew words were unnecessary. Every glance, every motion, every breath said what needed saying. But today she wanted words. "Do you miss the outside?" she asked, voice quiet. Luthen looked up slowly, his gaze clear and grounded. "The towers? Number the sky, the noise, people." He shook his head once. "I've only ever wanted quiet." She smiled. "You found it then." "I found something better." She stood, brushing her hands against her thighs, then walked toward him. He didn't rise, just turned slightly as she approached. She stopped in front of him. Their eyes met. He didn't reach for her. He never did. Luthen never assumed. But today, she closed the space between them. She knelt, slowly, resting her knees into the moss. Her fingers came up, not abrupt, not rushed, but with the steadiness of someone reaching toward a thing they've already decided is precious. She touched his face, lightly, a palm against his cheek, thumb at the edge of his jaw. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in. She felt it, the way his muscles tensed slightly, not from discomfort but reverence. "Luthen," she whispered. He opened his eyes. And finally, she leaned forward and kissed him. Not hard, not desperate, but deeply. She kissed him like the sun warming soil after a long winter, like something blooming between their ribs, like everything unsaid had found its shape in that shared breath. His hand rose and rested at her back, just between her shoulder blades. Not to hold her, not to possess her, but simply to anchor the moment, to say, "I'm here, still." The kiss deepened, slow and steady, like roots sinking into familiar ground. There was no rush, no fear, only warmth, only the weightless certainty of now. When they parted, their foreheads touched. Veltari's eyes were closed. Luthen's hand hadn't moved. "You taste like leaf dust," he murmured. She laughed softly, not pulling away. "You smell like old rope and tree bark." "Fair trade," he said. She opened her eyes then and looked at him. He wasn't beautiful in the sculpted way Alari men were taught to be, but she had never seen a face more alive, more present. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For never pushing, for waiting, for giving me space to become." He didn't answer right away. "Then, you were already becoming." "I just cleared the path." She kissed him again, briefly this time, a promise, not a question. And then they simply sat there, moss beneath them, the dome humming softly around them like an old song remembered. Somewhere in the far bed, a cluster of new shoots pushed through the mulch. Neither of them moved for a long while. There was no war above them today. No trial, no bloodline. Just two people, finally rooted. And the day, warm and whole, unfolded around them like something that had waited patiently to be lived.